Utashtere tukla.
Oh, désolé, là.
Tana gutsugi na digi sare.
Oh, lazo. Ouais. Lazo. Tene, tamala, tene, shokba dele, ningon dele, do gomo dele, chugins.
So I'd like to wish everyone a good morning or good afternoon or good evening.
Ne, tamala ya tene, tashi dele,
And welcome to all of you.
tama, debo yube, reba yus, kibu dan debo.
I hope everyone is doing well, that you're all happy and doing fine.
Tene, kazangoma ge chudun chik che somare, tene dilaya, yung taba nukonda shugins, yang jach.
And I would like again to extend my heartfelt apologies for once again interrupting our teaching series by canceling last week.
Tene, da Tsering chudi, jasi muju tome ki zebe, jasi laglen sudi matere.
So the teaching of today regards Gyesen Yoshu Tokme's 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas.
Ni piji, ngazo, sholoka piji ta juduks, piji tai jural.
Nishutsaruk.
Nita dule zara. Oh, lazo.
Nishutsa Jukla Lekson.
Lazo. Nishutsa dus ta zarawe, tene, Tsering kaps baba de tene, Parjan chugi nane tene, children ki paradu chimba la 2 years.
And so up until now, we've gone over 25 of the verses. And so today we've arrived at the 26th verse, which is among the 6 paramitas, the 6 transcendent perfections. This verse is about discipline or ethical restraint.
De shungdi mashung ngundu tene nga kaduyi na ki tamala tene ki tensu chi yanja yardu shugin is. Di karere sena tene chu nyendu re, chiga samdu re, kumdu re kare yina tosam konsum kare cheba yina ya. Tene di ngundu. Tene kulong di kechimbo res.
And so, as always, before starting any of these sessions, I always remind you of the same thing, which I would like to remind you of again today, which is that whichever Dharma activity you are engaging in, whether it's listening to the Dharma or contemplating it or meditating it, setting the right motivation is extremely important beforehand.
Che shudu jina kulong da kunju ni sungu yore tini nga da kenamba la kunju ki kola shira shugu me tini kenamba kulong da yahu jini senge yona tini kunju shira ji kechimbu da kulong da yahu jini chiga toni senge yona tini kunju da shira shu mogo wada jiredu kasi kunju da yahu ji kulong da yahu ji masena tini kunju da Kechimbo insare karasana kunjo digi na latte ni dini sem namying maybe chiga talk chigere di induzana kunjo de kechimbo resting and namji shira shugi me ne chiga sem chanjo sembe ki tsi sembe tone ji chuji shubaina dini kunjo de gaji ga yaboji chi tenshe bayo se wore dende ngane shugi yujire jaji ga
And generally speaking, with regards to the manner of receiving teachings, one usually speaks of the motivation and the conduct during the activity of listening to teachings. However, I don't talk to you much about the conduct aspect of receiving teachings, because I think that if your motivation is correct, then your conduct, will accordingly also be fine. So there's no need really to talk about conduct so much, as long as you listen to the teachings with the right motivation. However, if one doesn't really have the correct motivation, then conduct in terms of receiving the teachings may be important, because one's behavior while receiving teachings, if one has the correct behavior, that might help not to get distracted so much. However, if you already have the right motivation, that is to say, if your mind is suffused with bodhicitta as you listen to the teachings, then really there's no need to then talk about your general demeanor while receiving the teachings. And that's why I don't speak about the behavioral aspect so much when receiving teachings.
다들이 꿀롱 대 되니 장주심 지심비 돈에 대 주생고레스 년고레스 되는 거.
So please listen to these teachings by really suffusing your mind, embrace or say fully embracing the motivation of bodhicitta as you listen to these teachings.
Dini Tsering chö sembar jewe chö de dini kyase lalen sodi materes.
And so the Dharma that is to be, that we are to hear today, is these 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas by Gyaltsen Nyosul Tokme.
Dini dila dongbar gewa le gituen bardu gewa shung gituen tamar gewa chu gituen sumche.
And this consists of three parts: the virtue in the beginning, the virtue of the introduction, the virtue in the middle, the virtue of the main part, and the virtue at the end, the virtue of the conclusion.
Ni thomar gewa le gituen le dini chobar joba da sambar dam jaba ni che.
The virtue in the beginning, the virtue of the introduction, consists of homage and pledge to compose.
Ni bardu gewa niba bardu gewa shungi Tuendila ni ngondro chola chuksu da tini ngoshigi kebusum gilam la chuksus ni che.
The virtue of the main part, the virtue in the middle, the virtue of the main part of the text, consists in the manner of engaging in the preliminary steps of practice, and then the manner of engaging in the path of beings of the three levels of capacity.
Deche chik deche niba dila dini ang kashi ki shung kashi nanglo la tini bardi geba shungi duen dila tini semge ki kebi gyudang chik chira semge kaya ki gyudang tangbo deche tini niba dila semge nguyen sheba semge ki shung nguyen sheba niba deche sumba de tini semge ki labja sheba tini sums doose.
Or according to other texts, this virtue of the main part of the text can also be divided into three parts. The first is the causes for generating bodhicitta. The second is the actual explanation of bodhicitta, and the third is the training in bodhicitta.
Tene semge kebi gyudi tanda ngondo gi chola jukse debe tila tini chö dünsin doala azo to sabare.
And so the causes for generating bodhicitta consist in the manner of engaging in the 7 preliminary practices, which we have already gone over.
Tani simgi tani ji ngoy sheba dila tani tanda kibusumgi lamla juksu dise.
The actual explanation of bodhicitta corresponds to the path of the beings of the 3 types of capacity.
Tani kibusum sene kibu chungu kibu chembo sene kibu ding kibu chembo sral tisum diche.
And so the 3 being the people of lower capacity, people of middling capacity, and people of highest capacity.
Kibu chembo ki lam dila dini chiga di tongni nyingji sungju du gombe ye khansa gore sisi ni ki thale de dolwala dini chu ni du yang dila ya kibu chembo ki lam dila.
Sishini ki talede ki jela kare song jolwa.
Kibu chembo ki lam tongni nyingji sungju du gomba di gomne dini sisi ni ki thale dolwa chu temba dila ya dini ni du di temba la ni che subject.
Yes. And within the path of beings of highest capacity, there is also the twofold teaching of the meditation on the union of emptiness and compassion, which leads to liberation or transcendence of the extremes of existence and peace, or samsara and nirvana. And so this is within the context of beings of highest capacity. So that was the second part.
Ni dila thangbo de dini samba jangju chodu semke bada jorwa jangju gi sem gombas ni che
dini
yewa ni
kibu chempelamki konda kibu chempelamki kapsu ni yorero laso laso and so within this, there are also 2 parts within this path of the beings of highest capacity. There is the part on bodhicitta in aspiration, and then bodhicitta in application.
Today, Chorba Janju gi sem gomba de la yande ni che.
Koma sankai senande chik. Chorba Janju gi sem.
Laso di ni gi nani ni ba di tini Chorba Janju gi sem gomba de la yande ni che. Yewa. Kunso sem gi gomba da tendam gi sem gi gomba ni sha.
And so likewise, within the second part, the cultivation of bodhicitta and application, there are also 2 subparts. The meditation on, or the cultivation of relative bodhicitta. So again, the cultivation of relative bodhicitta and the cultivation of ultimate bodhicitta.
Dini the kunju janju yesem gomba de la dini yawa ni che tangbo de la dini kunju janju yesem gomba de la nyamsha do dashin jawa gomba dan jedub do yenge lam do chero gomba ni sha 제도 kurang
And so then within relative bodhicitta, there are also two subparts. First, the practice of the meditation session, exchanging oneself and other. And then second, the practice in the post-meditation, which is bringing unfavorable circumstances onto the path.
di chedini di nyamsha to dashin jewa gomba sine di tila dini tuendam simji gomba che ni mare tadire jeto gi jenge lamda kheba tila chu tenchi chu.
And so within the second part of the post-meditation, so bringing unfavorable circumstances onto the path consists of 10 trainings.
Didi tanda kunzu janju gisem kombatere ta niba didi dondam janju gisem kombatela yantani niche yawa.
And so this was all, these two belonged to relative bodhicitta. Then ultimate bodhicitta also has two subparts.
Tene nyamsha do total gombada jetop do tene chada ke yulda denshin pongwas.
And so within ultimate bodhicitta, we have the practice of the meditation session, which is the transcendence of conceptual thought, and the practice of the post-meditation, which consists in giving up all clinging onto the true existence of objects of attachment or aversion.
Niba jetop do chadang ke yulda denshin pongwa delayan tene niba delayan niche chayul denshin pongwa dan yul denshin pongwas yawa niche.
And the second part of in the post-meditation, giving up all clinging onto the true existence of objects of attachment and aversion also consists of two subparts. The first being giving up clinging onto the true existence of objects of attachment, and the second is giving up clinging onto the true existence of objects of aversion.
Te bardu di tanda di tyon sawar semji ngoy sheba di sarge yores tani sumgi nan.
And so we've already covered all of this, so that within the three main parts of the text, we've covered everything. We've finished the part on the actual explanation of bodhicitta, which was the second of the three parts.
Alas. Tadanda sumba di semji ki labja tilatuk devare sumba.
And so now we are in the third part, which is the trainings of bodhicitta. And this also consists of two subparts.
Labja ki tso dini parjin truk sheba da de yula tensul sheba nis.
The first is the main training, which is training in the 6 paramitas, the 6 transcendent perfections. And the second is how to rely on these, how to apply these within one's mind stream.
Parjin tu jimba suldim soba jundu something share up chirwala parjin tu ge na ne dini tam de jimbe paru de jimba de songcha ba de tani ba tring suldim ji paru jimba de la to wores.
And so within the first of these two, the training in the 6 paramitas, these consist of generosity, discipline, patience, joyful effort, meditation, and wisdom. And we have already covered generosity, so we are now at discipline.
Then John Simba 탐지기 네디 파르진 truly 냠네 지게레스 then that rank of the baba studentji 파로드 침비 티 냠네 간라 레터리 디 자와 디니 출데 메바 랑데 미두 나 신데 두버 두버 게메 니 대질 시비 듬바 메바이 출뎀 송와 자슬라니 니 아니 니슈 자주 그래달.
And so all Bodhisattvas practice the 6 Transcendent Perfections. And today, among these, we will discuss the Transcendent Perfection of discipline. The root text for this reads, "The practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to observe ethical restraint, without the slightest intention of continuing in samsaric existence. For lacking discipline, one will never secure even one's own well-being. And so any thought of bringing benefit to others would be absurd."
Da de la chulden ma barang de mi rub na shin den rubber de ba kemi ne da so de chir si bi dum ba me ba se de chik sumba di ge chim bu den ge res ji dan gong de yan jin bi paru de chim bi kap so ya ni shen cha me bi ge ta jin ba ji jin ba na jin bi paru de chim ba na ni jin ba ta chok de gyur be jin ba cha ge res ni na shin ya chulden mi de kap so ba ba ya Dini deji subi dumba mebasini korwala shenja mebi dini chudrimji sunggu yuris shigi yuris tala korwala shenja yubi ki chudrimji sungba ina dini doba peldu yuris doba de cheru cherdona dini chiga kare tamne korwa dini chiga doba de shukchaba chadana korwa yu chadu korwa yu chana digi dunga 제부 디 동아마도 중앙에 메두자니 데다보기 출림디 송바이나 데니 지랑 라 뇌에다 셴라에 뇌에마도 메레스두타 디 코로발라 셴차비기 된 출림디 데니 지가 야고 마레스게레스.
And so here in this verse, which again reads, "So the practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to observe ethical restraint without the slightest intention of continuing in samsaric existence. For lacking discipline, one will never secure even one's own well-beings, and so any thought of bringing benefit to others would be absurd." This second line here, "without the slightest intention of continuing in samsaric existence," or we could say without the slightest inclination or desire towards samsara. This is really the key line here in this verse. Just like for the perfection of generosity, the most supreme of all acts of generosity was the generosity that was completely free of any type of attachment or clinging. So just in the same way with discipline, the best discipline is the one that is free from all attachment to samsaric existence. That is because as long as we have desire, as long as we have attachment or inclination towards samsaric existence, as long as we haven't abandoned that, our desires will only increase. And with more and more desire, this only perpetuates the causes of samsara, because desire is at the very root of our wandering in samsara. Therefore, the only consequence, the only result that comes from growing, from the proliferation of desire, is actually unlimited suffering. In this manner, then, desire or attachment to samsaric existence can only bring harm to both ourselves and others, which is why, in order to practice the perfection of discipline, one must abandon attachment towards samsaric existence.
Any children say the sick the Anthony children to Bala. Children say res Lunga Yisumki.
And so the word for discipline in Tibetan, Tsultrim, really means in accord with the way, in accord with the right way. And so this is in accord with the right way for our body, speech, and mind.
Tayina Tanda Kapsu Baba Marangu Gijik Lunga Giina Retini Seminary Lunga Yisumgi Chige Mangchewaji Chopan Nemba Lunga Yisumgi Chopan Nemba Sultan Matumbaji Chige Chawa Segore Leji Leondu Tini Chige Tizo Judo Karirisana Chig Maranzola the Nyomombo Nyomombo the Shejagi Tibegi Tib de Ondu Tinichi Samsam Maranzo the Tigi Wang do Shorsondo Tini Choba Lunga Yusum Sunga the Di Wang do Dro Ondu Tini Tigi Choba Nemba Doji Lunga Yusum Sunga Chulda Matumbegi Tini Le Mambuji Legi Ores.
However, for a large part of the time, we engage in negative behaviors of body, speech, and mind. We are not acting appropriately, whether it's physically, verbally, or mentally. And in this way, we accumulate negative karma. And what is the main cause of this karma? It's our afflictive and cognitive obscurations. It's under the sway of our afflictive and cognitive obscurations, with our body, speech, and mind under the control of these obscurations, we engage in negative behavior. We engage in behavior that is not appropriate, that is not according to the right way.
Rangingi Sembakyu Moga Ching around the careers and some lang around the Choba Samboje with it. Range Choba Samboje, Chi did Choba Sambo Digi, Tone, the knee, Shenlaya, Pens Peme, Peng, Sem Legaya, Le, and the knee Lumagi, Chobaya, the Nitsula Tumbaji, Lega Legate, Tati, Yapuji Chigi, or the Kumzen careers and now, then ya, in Aranzola, Tupujipu Mare. Nyomo with Tiba did and the neck of Gitiba Doji Charles Mado. The down the Yabucha, Yabu Choba Sambo, Yunga, Chula Tumbe, Lega, Lea, Jumsen, around the Devorshi winning boy, you biggie. And Yoba Latenia, the Yabo, Chagres, Chigres.
But then again, sometimes it happens that we just naturally act in a positive way. We just naturally do good. We think of benefiting others and we act upon that thought. We actually act for others' welfare. And that's great. But what's the reason for that? Well, the reason is we're not all bad, right? These afflictions that are causing us to act negatively, the obscurations, they're just temporary. They're just temporary. And aside from that, really underneath it, we all have Buddha nature. And it's because of this Buddha nature that we can also just spontaneously act in very positive ways at times.
Kapkabla the thing around the lower Gitimadi, the Tukbudi. Dini that Tanda Tukbudi and Tanda said the Chibu Mayimba, Toma Meban, Dini Komshi, Komson we Kenji. Tanda Bacha Rala Tubu, Digi Kenji, Dini, they are digging Nyomo Bawang the Shorundu, tene di choba ngeba yang ne yang do tene choba ngeba sna simgi kulong tene ji yagbo meba chi lunga ge tene choba de ya tene ji bayo meba chi suldan tumba mayin ba ji chi yondu zane dide e karasana ngazola kha yo mares chi kora sheni chi chige yo mare ta di nyomongba ge chi soma meba ne sa bakcha tukbu di ge wangdu shor shenwang ge wangdu shor den den de cha du ge res.
However, sometimes because these adventitious obscurations are so strong, they're so thick sometimes, not just from this life, but from countless lives since the beginning of time, or since beginningless time. All these latent tendencies, all these habitual tendencies that we have accumulated, that make us prone to the afflictions. These sometimes cause us to behave in very negative ways. And behaving negatively means basically having an ill intention, having a negative mental motivation, and therefore speaking or physically acting in harmful ways. But it's really not our fault when that happens. We are not our own masters. We are under the power of these habitual tendencies that we have been accumulated since beginningless times when that happens.
So de la ge shisho de kare sada tene kulong sem ge tone tene kulong chi chul na tumba ni de lunga ge kini choba chi ge I chul na tumba chi tene denga rang la te chi ha ko chi go res tamboda chi rang la choba de lunga ge na re sem ge kulong ge tone na re chul na tumba chi do mindu khase me ba ina tene di kulong di tene chi yagbo ji sangbo ji suya la chongo re ten lunga di choba chi sangbo ji yongaya ge tabla tene aranzo chongo res.
So what's the most important here? The most important is for one's mental intentions to be appropriate, to be in accordance with the right way, and for one's verbal and physical behaviors to likewise be appropriate or in accordance with the right way. And for this, we need to be aware of ourselves. We need to be aware whether we have the appropriate motivation and whether or not we are speaking and acting appropriately. And if not, then we need to change our motivation and we need to change our speech and our physical actions.
Di indu tanda di Quran tsigi nanglo la chuldim me ba rangden midrub na shindin drubar deba keme ne se jidwa da chuldim me ba rangden midrub na khazi de chuldan tumba ji chuldan mathimbe ki lega ji khare lunga yisum khare ki cheba ina ya teni ji rangde ji kyaji ge khare na dubgi mares dub thuggi mares te pena rang kibu yong mara ya lega khare ji cheba na te chuldan mathimba ji phame taw ji cheba ina teni rang lega da khawa dubgu ru mara ya chuldim da pha ji susre te rang lega ya dubgu mares kibu je yong mare lunga gi cheba ngeba je tena lungba Singapore dabajila phebaina ko tik lo tik traffic light da chokpa yengi den zo khawa kasala mayu ka pe thap nyeba syo sha da khazi yu ba ina den cheba chimba jab go da te cheba chimba jab so na de rang mu shu gu ala Mu dogure teni traffic light la kasi ko trim ga ma ki brosha na teni ra accident cha yo bude khamba cha ju la ba cha ju te rang ge de da du be pass susire roya rang ge de ma dum na de shen ge de da pass susire ta din na shin ge chuldim me ba ina kasi chuldim ji sung wa na chul na dem ba ji du ba na teni rang ge de ya du thu ge shen ge de du thu ba la ya teni 지금 digi lega legi res ti shindu de chulde me barandu midum na shinden rubar de ba kemines ti rang de je dum matum na ni sheng dum tubela chungin de zo ni kemu gine res kemu shu go res
So as the text says, lacking discipline, one will never secure even one's own well-being, and so any thought of bringing benefit to others would be absurd. So if we're not disciplined in our actions of body, speech, and mind, then we won't ever be able to accomplish anything for ourselves. If you just act carelessly, then you won't even be able to achieve your own happiness. You won't get anything done. You won't accomplish anything. For example, if you ever go to Singapore, the rules there are very strict for traffic, for example, respecting the traffic lights, or regarding where one should dispose of garbage, and so on and so forth. So you're not allowed to litter, throw garbage just anywhere. And if you start, for example, littering, then there's a very heavy fine to pay if you're caught littering. So, that's your loss, right? You'll have to pay your own money for that. Or if you go through a red light, if you drive through a red light, then you might possibly get into an accident, break your arm, break a leg. So there's nothing to be gained from not following the rules. Breaking the rules, you're only putting yourself at risk, and you're not accomplishing anything for yourself, right? So that's the idea here. If you're not able to accomplish even your own benefits, then how do you think you might accomplish others' benefit? On the other hand, if you do have discipline, then you will be able to accomplish your own benefit, and therefore you will be able to accomplish others as well. So like the text says, lacking discipline, one will never secure even one's own well-being, right? So any thought of bringing benefit to others would basically be laughable.
kasi rang ji chulda tumba chulda matumbe gi lunga sre kore sem kulong ya boji mebi toni kasi nga simjin shen gi shen chama dewa la ko gi konzo la roba chi gi sena tini ngarang zo peje jakjun do cha do kore ko thamba she jo do te maro ya rang da tambo gi di kulong choba ya boji me sana tini shemba la je labje jak tena tingone jakjun do cha do ra nga do chai des
So imagine you really don't have good intentions. You don't have good behavior, but then you go around saying you are benefiting others. That's really laughable. You're just a fraud, right? If you yourself don't have good intentions, but then you go around giving advice to others, that's just a big scam.
tini di rangi da takje tae de gechim bores choba sange yakbo da dukja de shinche goya da shinche ge ha goya de jo de gechim bores yewa che.
And so it's very important to examine oneself and to be aware of one's own intentions, to check one's own behaviors and conditions.
digi nangni ta chokdo gyurba di sulrim di taji ta kondo shuba tangsho dire dechir sibi dumba mebayi sulrim songa jasa lani sibi dumba tena korwa la shincha mebe ge sulrim jik sungo re sangarangzo.
And the best among all types of intentions or behaviors is that described in text without the slightest intention of continuing in samsaric existence. So being completely free of attachment and desire, that is the best discipline one can keep.
Ni chikdang chik kulong ge tone shuba ina kulong di semjin shimpen shen chi zingi logic ge tone dine sulrim di sungo res rangi chibu mayimba ta sulrim ge na shencha mebe ge sulrim sung sedu dine chikden chuji da debi ge lo mayimba dine chik rang 캡상 용해다 민 용해다 우이 망보 토베다 데니지 로마 망보 두에다 데니 데니지 마임바 치도 데니기 치도 제니 콜롱 마임바 데니지 오네 제 심제 탐제 산지지 고방 데니 타바다 탐지 김베기 고방라 고에기 치도 데니 제 출다 툼베 콜롱야 야보지 키에다 롱하기 좁아야 데니 지에기 치도 출림 Sungures that children get on the shoulder.
Or from the point of view of the motivation, then we would say that the best type of motivation is altruistic intent, the intent to benefit others, cherishing others, and not just oneself. When we speak of discipline that is free of all desire or attachment, that means a discipline that is untainted by the 8 worldly concerns, not acting out of desire for profit, for reputation, wealth, accumulating, gathering disciples, or anything like that, but instead acting solely from the motivation to establish all beings on the level of, in the state of liberation and awakening, and letting that guide all our thoughts, speech, and actions.
Deni peji shabayna korwal shinchagi tsulim songba dawina tirangla ya ne khandi chege resna mama tanda kadambegi lama ben singin jure konge namda da pena bekong ritual shu ne deni chi tham nyendubra shu kapsu tene konge da jinda de tring pije peki res and kong kula data insare jinda tringa ben kere charga yogi insin tene kong topja ji samloji deni ji po insare o tringa jinda de nga yosa yogi sidu tene konge chobad zo pe sangma su tene chobad zo pe yakpo phu chida chi chume zo yakpo su pe mendo zo phu choba sham pe taje ba sham sha tene jinda ma pe ngela tene khona ta kale yab ya choba ta sama tangma su yakpo ji sham sha do ko ba yakpo ji sham sha do ya ta yang do namjule pe kora ing jebo zebo choba pe kanso gore bab chakpo yakpo ji kong je yin sa ro namjule laksi namji yakpo su ge sa mare ga milli ge mara ko phu ge sa mare tene thong do kora sembala gyoba chmo ji kere thopja 오 다디 ngone ji choba yakbo ji maredu samne tini khorang ge thap me tangsa ge chogla ta thap lo yara la thala tini ji leni ya choba sangma la thala tor ja ta ji zigbu de sangma zigbu me osen tini desa sangma la ko thala tor je te jigdin chuji jo thala tor je thala ya sen da cho nga ji choba zigbu thonga de sangma nga jigdin chuji re du jinda yong ne tini 콜 진다기 체도 수요래도 나랑원에 심지기 체도 민도 삼네 콜로를 겨바지 계제더니 지된 최제다 바로 메바 되니 셈바지 코나라 샤르바레스 오타 데이터고지 수dum지 숨거레스 근데 수나
And so, as an example of what that would look like, to truly embrace a discipline that is free from all attachment for worldly existence, there's a story of a Kadampa master of old called Den. And he was staying in recitation and meditation retreat in the mountain. And his benefactor, his sponsor, had told him that he would come a certain day. And so when that day came, this meditator thought, oh, my benefactor is coming today. I should clean up the place. And so he cleaned his altar really nicely. He made beautiful new offerings, offering beautiful flowers, arranging everything very nicely, all looking great. And then, he sat down again, and he was looking around at his place, and he thought, wow, this actually looks better than it usually does. These offerings look much better than what I usually do. And he thought to himself, oh, I really lapsed in my conduct here. And he gave rise to, he felt intense regret, because he thought he had just done this to kind of impress his benefactor. And so he got ash from his fireplace and just scattered it all over his altar, all over his seat, just all over his place, scattered the ash from his fireplace, thinking that he was throwing ash over the 8 worldly concerns, because he realized that he hadn't prepared the altar in this way for the sake of all sentient beings, but that he had done so for the sake of his benefactor. And so that's what it looks like to practice, to have a conduct that is completely free of the 8 worldly concerns. In that moment, he actually freed himself fully of the 8 worldly concerns.
Indo dani korwala shinja me bichuldim dani sumye di lunga de ni yide sumya di kechambores.
And so when it comes to keeping a discipline that is free from all attachment or desire for worldly existence, all 3 aspects of our behavior are important: the mental, the verbal, and the physical.
Dani tadidago kare suldim sumba ina dani shencha korwala shencha ki shukchbo ge thone suldim sumba ina dani anje shemba pejores di pe di tanda disere dawa dakwas ta mi yuma jores ta mi namji yuma mi jores dani ko to sae tunga la to kanga yogi mi ji den nyemaji korang ti longmo longa dores thomla longmo long do jini korang la ji ne dudwal ne bali den de mangbo ji khiyong den kola longmo long de ni du mangbo ji ra so res ra to korang ge ti ya korang nya sa ge to la ya chang ja de chang ne sha deni ko the des o ta ti do ji longmo long ende chedana sae thong la da pe kanga mi du sae thong la da pe ya pura gi du ta nga sa sha ra korang la du mong pura ya nam ko la chang ne sha den korang de sha ko samlo chitang des korang samlo tang de du te ko samlo de la o sae thong ni jor song ta nga le keme ji ne deni keme di len sa be la deni keme de la pugu ji ke deni pugu de la ming ji ta Ming the Karitaguna, things that the Samlor, the Franchita, Milamid, imagine children. Then it Tobja gonna Jeguni Mata on the Zane, Dawa Jishari Zara, Dawa Nitsimo, Dawasha, the Otoni. They cannot change. Oh, now Bugu the case on the day Bugu Mingdala. Then Dawa Dawa is all Teje. Dawa Kayago, Red, Tenejita, Tended, the Samlo down the told the Tobja. Judy the year Namgala Tasha Jujura, the Tobja Ma Zarni, Cuba the Che, Zars of the Koran Golake, the Koran Mashi on. That day and the Shenja Chimbo, Samlotan, then the Shenja Koran getting around the boutique, the lady, Sedilla, some Chuchubo Tansona, then it's Sulim Sumbaina, they got Karile and the Luda, the assembly. The name Tamadi, the Judy Koran Lama says on. Good bit says on the end of the region, correlation that Chimbo get on a solemn sumbaina. The name Kamala, the name Rangla, do not take rest, Corvala camera, Kova Chamson, Dunga Mongote and Gura. The Indo, the native, the negative children, the Mason was in Shenja, Corvala Shenja, maybe get children the Sungores.
As for an example of what it looks like to have a discipline or conduct that is fully embroiled in attachment to samsara. There's the story of the child called Chandrakirti, which is the story of a poor man who always had great difficulty in finding food and drink. Just a very poor man who one day managed to get, or as he was begging, got a big bag of barley flour, or a big quantity of barley flour. And so he brought it back home and he was really happy, and he put it like up above, he like tied it up to under the roof. He placed it up over his head there to keep, and he was lying on his bed and thinking, on his mat and thinking, oh, now I have, I definitely have enough to eat. That's taken care of. I don't need to worry about food and drink anymore. Now the next thing I'll do is I'll have to take a wife, and then this wife will bear me a child. And what should I call this child? And so he was just like going on in his imagination in that way. And at that moment, the moon rose over the window above him, and the moon rays shone in. And so he thought, oh, I'll call the child Famous Moon, right? Which is Chandrakirti. Call the child Famous Moon. And so he was kind of like full in his imagination. But at that moment, the whole sack of barley came undone and fell on his head, and he died. And so that's basically what happens when you're still enmeshed in your desire for samsara. It ends up killing you. And so in this way, if whatever we engage in, whatever endeavors we have, if our discipline is mixed in this way with attachment and desire for samsara, it will only bring us unhappiness and suffering, because attachment and desire are what cause wandering in samsara, and samsara brings a tremendous amount of suffering. Therefore, one should strive for a discipline that is completely free from attachment and desire for samsara.
Negab gets the top Paljordan Yenda, Senada Mingi Chedu, Maimba, Tene, Sulim Sumbaina, Tungayusum, Mone, Rangi, Rangya, the name Tarvada Tamji Jimbegi, Lamdo Doyashi Dam, the nation Semje Tamji, and the name de Tama, Koradonga, Yasola, Jobegi Chedu, the name Sulim Sumbaina. The 자주 생각이 드니 라렌 차게 res.
And so if we don't follow discipline just for the sake of temporary gains or reputation or fame or anything like that, but if instead we keep our discipline for the sake, in order to ourselves traverse the path to liberation and omniscience, and protect all other beings from the ocean of suffering that is samsara, then that discipline truly is the practice of the Bodhisattvas.
이 단다 데캅스 바발라 네게 쿨롱 생기토니 쿨롱다 룽아게 니게 쪼바 상보세디 룽아게 쪼바 상보세디 니랑게 네 출림들에 베나 년년도다 랑자 네 지 망치와도 쪼워디치 쪼바 룽아게 쪼발라 망치와지 출림 송구에레 출단 tum바지 Tining danda kadu na kulung mangboji semgitong kulung se di sulrim di tini janju sembe ki sulrim chik rangjibu mayim ba semje thamji korwa tunga le jasule pa drol ni tharba thamji ki kobang la kwe gi chedo ni chik sulrim sunge gi kulung di ko res di kulung di tini thekba chimbo gu sulrim chado ko res di ni sulrim nada tapsa po chulna tumba se.
And so today I've mostly spoken of discipline from the point of view of the motivation, right? I've talked a lot about our mental disposition, motivation, intention, right? Aside from that, there's also our behaviors of body and speech. But physical and verbal discipline is mainly the discipline of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, so the listeners and the solitary realizers. Whereas what I've spoken of today, which is the more mental discipline of our motivation, which emphasizes motivation more than anything else, that is the discipline of the Bodhisattvas, which consists in not only striving for our own benefit, but striving for the benefit of all beings, to establish them all onto liberation, into the state of liberation and omniscience. And that is the discipline of the great vehicle of Mahayana.
Ya tharba ji lamdu dwe ke jitu churim sunge de so de tanda ta nyerangi lamra yene yala jela ten churim sunge lunga gi choba ten chulna tumbe gi nyamle la te ne ren rang tharba thamji ji be gobang dwe gi ji pen dogere tene janju sembe gi kulung ti choba churim ti tene kulung yakbo ji semje thamji gi chedu dwe na ne janju sembe gi ne ti chadu ge sulim laglen.
So as I was explaining then, if we are primarily motivated to traverse the path to liberation ourselves, so only achieve liberation for ourselves, and for that reason we keep appropriate physical and verbal behaviors for the sake of liberation, then that is the path of the Pratyeka Buddhas and the Shravakas. Whereas the Bodhisattva's discipline is to keep appropriate behavior for the benefit of all beings. And when one practices in this way, then that is truly the discipline of the Bodhisattvas.
So the similar res janju sembe namji kulong.
And so really the motivation of the Bodhisattvas is primarily depends on the mental motivation. The discipline of the Bodhisattvas primarily rests on the mental factor.
인도 장지 심바 망보지기 되니 룽하게 좁발래시라 나저게 예와 체시게 말해 술림 so the same kulong getone 되니 예와 체고래 장지 심바 이메세 술림 저지 심비게 술림.
Therefore, much of the time we can't really distinguish a bodhisattva based on their physical or verbal actions or discipline. What really makes the difference, what really distinguishes a bodhisattva is their mental discipline, their motivation.
Tini pije tering dewa senjure chuzi chikdo do trans order do. Tini diche samshagi tini tiwa rena ane songro nas.
And so we'll stop here for today. So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Or raise your hand and ask it also.
Yes,
Samara.
hola. Ore. Tenga tanda sama inji lungba dewa US discipline children sum chuzi shiwa ya lang is sum de chegala tingarala.
So I'm currently in England. I just arrived in England. So my own discipline today was to get up at 3:30 to give these teachings at 4 a.m.
That's good. My discipline.
It looks like there aren't any questions today.
Also. And Mena, the more chickens, Rolla.
Okay, so if there aren't any questions, then we'll dedicate the merit.
Sonam de Tamjesic Bani, Tumni Bed, Dana Tam, Kegana Zibala, Toba, Sebe, Sula, Doa, Chanchu, Simturim Boji, Maji Panam, Gij. Kibanya Ba Mebaya, Gone, Gondo, Pelvara, Dembaji, Tamzu Jamba, Demba, Newish, Salvata, Tense, Fellow Tarsin, Demba, Uring Beda,